In the quietude of a moonless night, the phone's shrill ring echoed through the cavernous halls of the old Victorian house. The sound was so jarring it seemed to rattle the very bones of the structure. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked away the seconds, its hands glowing faintly in the dim light, marking the passage of time with an eerie precision. It was well past midnight, and the house, nestled deep within the woods, was shrouded in an impenetrable darkness that seemed to seep into every corner, every crevice. The phone continued its insistent cry, a haunting melody that sent shivers down the spines of the house's inhabitants. In the master bedroom, Martha and Henry Whitmore lay frozen beneath the covers, their hearts pounding in unison with the relentless ringing. They exchanged a glance, their eyes wide with a shared terror that needed no words. The phone's display cast an eerie glow on the nightstand, illuminating the name that sent a chill down their spines. Emily.
15 years had passed since that fateful night, a night that had forever altered the course of their lives. 15 years since their daughter Emily had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the dense forest that surrounded their home. The police had searched for weeks, combing the woods with dogs and volunteers, but no sign of the girl was ever found. It was as if the earth itself had opened up and claimed her, leaving behind only echoes of her laughter and the fading scent of her favorite lilac perfume. But Martha and Henry knew the truth. They knew the dark secret that festered within the walls of their home, a secret that gnawed at their souls like a ravenous beast. They knew that Emily was gone, not lost or taken, but gone in the most final and irrevocable of ways. And they knew that they were the ones who had sent her to her grave. The phone's ringing finally ceased, leaving behind a deafening silence that seemed to press in on them from all sides. Martha's breath hitched in her throat, her eyes locked onto the now darkened screen as if expecting it to spring to life once more. Henry reached out a trembling hand, his fingers hovering over the phone for a moment before snatching it up and clutching it to his chest. "Henry?" Martha whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the room. What if it's really her?" Henry's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles turning white with the force of his grasp. "It can't be," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You know it can't be. We buried her, Martha. We buried our little girl." Martha's eyes filled with tears, the memory of that night rushing back to her with a vividness that stole her breath. She could still see the small, lifeless form wrapped in a faded quilt, the earth piling up around her as they lowered her into the ground. She could still hear the soft thud of the dirt as it hit the makeshift shroud, the sound echoing in her mind like a funeral dirge. But even as she recalled the grim details of that night, a flicker of doubt ignited within her. What if they had been wrong? What if, by some miracle or curse, Emily had survived? What if she was out there, alone and afraid, reaching out to them from the shadows? The phone rang again, the sound slicing through the silence like a knife. This time, Henry answered it, his voice barely more than a whisper as he spoke into the receiver. "Hello?" There was a pause, a moment of silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. And then a voice, soft and distant, like an echo from the past.
Daddy?
Henry's breath caught in his throat, the single word sending a jolt of terror coursing through his veins. It was Emily's voice. There was no mistaking it. But how could it be? How could she be calling them after all these years, after all that they had done? Emily? He choked out, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. Is that really you? There was another pause, and then the voice spoke again, stronger this time, more insistent.
It's me, Daddy. I need your help. Please, you have to come find me.
Martha's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob as she listened to the one-sided conversation. She could hear the desperation in her daughter's voice, the pleading tone that tugged at her heartstrings like a physical force. It was Emily, she was sure of it, and she was alive. Henry's grip on the phone tightened, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the impossible. He knew that he should hang up, that he should dismiss the call as a cruel prank or a figment of his guilt-ridden imagination. But he couldn't. He couldn't ignore the voice of his daughter, the child he had loved and lost, the child he had killed. "Where are you, Emily?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me where you are, and I'll come get you, I promise." The voice on the other end of the line hesitated, as if considering his words. And then softly it spoke.
I'm in the woods, Daddy. I'm in the place where you left me.
The line went dead, leaving Henry and Martha staring at each other in stunned silence. The words echoed in their minds, a chilling reminder of the past that refused to stay buried. They knew the place she spoke of, the place where they had left her all those years ago. And they knew that they had no choice but to go back. As they dressed in silence, the weight of their actions pressing down on them like a physical force, they couldn't help but wonder what awaited them in the depths of the forest. Would they find their daughter alive and well, a miracle in the flesh? Or would they be confronted with the ghost of their past, a specter risen from the grave to seek vengeance? But they knew that they had to find out, no matter the cost. The woods were dark and foreboding, the towering trees casting long, ominous shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at them as they made their way deeper into the heart of the forest. The beam of their flashlight cut through the inky blackness, illuminating the path before them like a beacon in the night. But it did little to dispel the sense of unease that clung to them like a second skin, the feeling that they were being watched, that they were not alone. To Henry's arm, her fingers digging into his flesh as they navigated the familiar terrain. They had walked this path countless times before, in the days and weeks following Emily's disappearance, searching for any sign of their lost daughter. But they had never ventured this far, never dared to approach the place where they had left her, the place where their dark secret lay buried. As they drew closer to their destination, the air seemed to grow colder, the wind whispering through the trees like a mournful lament. Martha shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her as she scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. She half expected to see Emily step out from behind a tree, her eyes accusing, her voice filled with condemnation. But there was nothing, only the endless expanse of the woods, stretching out before them like a vast, unknowable void. And then suddenly, they were there. The clearing was just as they remembered it, the ground still bare and untouched, as if the very earth itself refused to heal from the wound they had inflicted upon it. The makeshift grave was still visible, a slight depression in the soil marking the spot where they had laid their daughter to rest. Martha's breath hitched in her throat as she stared at the grave, the reality of what they had done crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She could still see Emily's face, pale and lifeless, her eyes closed as if in sleep. She could still hear the soft thud of the dirt as it hit her body, the sound echoing in her mind like a funeral dirge. And then, suddenly, she saw it. A faint glimmer of light, barely visible in the darkness, flickering like a candle flame in the distance. She gasped, a hand flying to her mouth as she pointed toward the source of the illumination. "Henry?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "Look!" Henry followed her gaze, his eyes widening as he took in the sight before him. The light was coming from the grave, a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. It pulsed and flickered, growing brighter with each passing second, until it was almost blinding in its intensity. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving behind only darkness and the faint echo of a child's laughter. Martha and Henry exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in their chests as they stared at the now empty grave. They knew that they should turn back, that they should flee from this place and never look back. But they couldn't. They couldn't ignore the voice of their daughter, the child they had loved and lost, the child they had killed. With a deep breath, they stepped forward, their feet sinking into the soft earth as they approached the grave. And as they did, they felt it, a presence, a force, something that seemed to reach out and grab them, pulling them down, down, down into the depths of the earth. They struggled and fought, their limbs flailing as they tried to break free from the unseen force that held them captive. But it was no use. They were helpless, trapped at the mercy of whatever dark power had taken hold of them. And then, suddenly, they were falling. The world around them spun and twisted, the trees and the sky and the ground all blurring together in a dizzying kaleidoscope of color and motion. They screamed, their voices echoing through the void as they plummeted deeper and deeper into the abyss. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. They landed with a thud, their bodies hitting the ground with a force that knocked the wind from their lungs. They lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, their minds reeling as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. And then slowly, they opened their eyes. They were in a room, a small, dimly lit space with walls of rough-hewn stone and a ceiling that seemed to press down on them from above. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, the smell so overpowering it made their stomachs churn. As their eyes adjusted to the dim light, they began to take in their surroundings, their gazes flicking from one corner of the room to the next. And then, suddenly, they saw it. A figure, standing in the shadows, its form barely visible in the gloom. Martha's heart leapt into her throat as she stared at the figure, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. It was a girl, she realized, a girl with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, a girl who looked exactly like Emily. She whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the room, "Is that you?" The figure stepped forward, its movement slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. And as it did, Martha and Henry saw the truth. It was Emily, but not the Emily they remembered. This Emily was older, her features sharper, her eyes filled with a cold, calculating intelligence that sent a shiver down their spines. She was dressed in a tattered gown, the fabric stained and torn, as if she had been wearing it for years. And in her hand, she held a knife, the blade glinting wickedly in the dim light.
"Hello, Mother.
Her voice like ice.
I've been waiting for you."
Martha and Henry stared at their daughter in horror, their minds struggling to comprehend the reality of what they were seeing. How was this possible? How could Emily be standing before them alive and well after all these years? And then suddenly it hit them. The truth, the terrible, awful truth that they had been too blind to see. Emily had never been lost. She had never been taken. She had been right here all along, trapped in this God-forsaken place, waiting for the day when she could exact her revenge. "Emily," Henry said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation, "please, you have to listen to us. We never meant to hurt you. We never meant for any of this to happen." Emily's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on the knife as she took another step forward.
"You never meant to hurt me."
Her voice dripping with sarcasm.
"You never meant to leave me here, alone and afraid, to rot in the darkness. You never meant to bury me alive, to steal my life and my future and my very soul."
Martha's heart ached as she listened to her daughter's words, the pain in her voice like a physical blow. She wanted to reach out, to take Emily in her arms and hold her close, to tell her that everything would be all right. But she knew that it was too late for that, too late for apologies, too late for forgiveness. All that was left was the cold, hard truth. "We thought you were dead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we had lost you forever. We never meant to hurt you, Emily. We never meant to cause you pain. But we did, and for that, we are truly, truly sorry." Emily's eyes flicked from Martha to Henry, her expression unreadable as she studied their faces. And then, slowly, she lowered the knife, her shoulders slumping as if a great weight had been lifted from them.
"I know,"
she said, her voice soft and filled with a profound sadness.
"I know that you never meant to hurt me, but you did, and now I have to hurt you.
Before Martha and Henry could react, Emily lunged forward, the knife flashing in her hand as she slashed at their throats. They stumbled back, their hands flying to their necks as they tried to staunch the flow of blood that poured from the wounds. But it was no use. The damage was done, the life draining from their bodies as they collapsed to the ground. As they lay there, their vision fading to black, they saw Emily standing over them, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and satisfaction. And then slowly, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as if she had never been there at all. And as the darkness claimed them, Martha and Henry knew that they had finally paid the price for their sins. They had finally atoned for the terrible thing they had done all those years ago. But at what cost? The woods were silent, the only sound the soft rustle of the leaves as the wind whispered through the trees. The clearing was empty, the grave undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. But deep within the heart of the forest, a figure moved, its steps slow and deliberate as it made its way through the underbrush. It was a girl, her long dark hair flowing behind her like a banner, her eyes filled with a cold, calculating intelligence that belied her youthful appearance. She paused for a moment, her gaze flicking back towards the clearing, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And then, with a sigh, she turned and continued on her way, disappearing into the shadows as if she had never been there at all. And as she walked, she knew that she was finally free. Free from the past, free from the pain, free from the darkness that had held her captive for so long. She was Emily Whitmore, and she was alive, and she would never, ever look back. But as she made her way deeper into the woods, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something was following her just out of sight. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to outrun the unseen presence that seemed to dog her every step. And then suddenly, she saw it. A figure standing in the shadows, its form barely visible in the gloom. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the apparition, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. It was a girl, she realized, a girl with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, a girl who looked exactly like her. And as she stared at the figure, a chill ran down her spine, a cold, creeping dread that seemed to seep into her very bones, for she knew with a certainty that defied all logic and reason that she was looking at herself. She was looking at the ghost of Emily Whitmore, and as she stood there, frozen in terror, she knew that she was not alone, that she would never be alone, not as long as the ghost of her past continued to haunt her, to follow her, to remind her of the terrible things she had done. She had killed her parents, the people who had loved and cared for her, the people who had given her life. And now she would pay the price. She would pay the price for all eternity.